The easiest way to reveal a person's character is to give them someone they believe they can look down on. The dinner rush had barely begun when the first careless laugh echoed across the polished dining room of Carter's Prime, one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers cast warm reflections across marble floors, while soft piano music floated through conversations between executives, tourists, and families celebrating special occasions. Every table was reserved. Every server moved with practiced precision. Every detail had been carefully designed to create the illusion that perfection could be purchased. Naomi Brooks adjusted the black apron neatly tied over her white shirt, balanced a polished serving tray against one hand, and welcomed another group of guests with the same calm smile she had offered every customer that evening. Her voice remained warm, her movements graceful, and her attention never drifted, even as the restaurant became louder with every passing minute. Most guests remembered her because she listened before she spoke. Most co-workers remembered her because she never complained, even when others quietly handed her the least desirable tables. She thanked the hostess after receiving another section near the kitchen doors where impatient customers often ended up after unexpected delays. It was the fourth difficult assignment she had accepted that week without protest. Across the service station, two experienced servers exchanged amused glances before one of them leaned toward another employee just loudly enough to be overheard. "Give it to Naomi," he said with a smirk. "She seems happy doing everybody else's work." A few people chuckled before returning to their duties. Naomi pretended not to hear. She simply picked up another tray and continued walking. Minutes later, a busy family accidentally spilled a glass of iced tea across one corner of their table. Before anyone could react, Naomi calmly arrived with clean towels, reassured the embarrassed parents that accidents happened every day, and quietly replaced everything without making the children feel guilty. The family thanked her repeatedly while another nearby customer watched with visible admiration. Yet behind the service station, the same coworkers rolled their eyes. "She acts like she owns the place," one whispered. "Maybe she thinks kindness earns promotions." The restaurant manager, Daniel Harper, approached just as another order was delayed because of a mistake inside the kitchen. Without asking questions, he looked directly at Naomi. "Table 16 has been waiting too long," he said sharply. "Handle it before we lose another review." Naomi glanced at the order screen. She immediately recognized that the delay had not originated from her station, but she answered with quiet professionalism. "I will take care of them." Daniel nodded once before walking away, already focused on another issue. None of the employees corrected him. None admitted where the mistake had actually begun. Naomi carried the responsibility anyway. She approached the waiting guests, apologized sincerely for the delay, offered fresh bread and complimentary beverages while the kitchen completed the meals, and remained beside the table long enough to answer every question with patience and respect. Within minutes, frustration softened into appreciation. Even disappointed customers found themselves smiling again. Near the entrance, several employees watched the interaction before one of them muttered under his breath, "She tries way too hard." Another replied, "It does not matter. She is still just a waitress." Naomi heard those words this time. She paused for only a fraction of a second before continuing toward the kitchen with the same steady expression she had worn since the beginning of her shift. She never argued. She never defended herself. She simply continued treating every guest with the dignity she wished people would offer one another. What no one inside Carter's Prime realized that evening was that the woman wearing the simple black apron was not there because she needed the job. She was there because she wanted to discover exactly how people behaved when they believed no one important was watching. The evening grew busier with every passing minute until the dining room settled into the familiar rhythm that separated exceptional restaurants from ordinary ones. Every server hurried between tables carrying polished trays beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, while conversations blended into a steady hum of celebration, business, and laughter. Naomi Brooks continued moving gracefully through the crowded room with the same calm professionalism that had already won the appreciation of countless guests. She remembered names without checking reservations, noticed empty glasses before anyone asked for another refill, and quietly adjusted every small detail that made people feel welcome. Yet none of those qualities seemed to matter behind the service station. The more patiently she worked, the more openly a few coworkers questioned her. "You smile too much," one server muttered while entering another order into the computer. "People like you always think being nice fixes everything." Another employee laughed softly before sliding another demanding table onto Naomi's assignment list without asking permission. "She will not complain," he said. "She never does." Naomi noticed the change immediately. Nearly every difficult customer had somehow become her responsibility. Families arriving late, large parties requesting separate checks, guests unhappy with delayed meals, and last-minute reservations were quietly redirected toward her section. The pattern was too organized to be accidental, yet she accepted every assignment with the same composed expression. Nearby, a young busser watched with growing concern. He had worked at Carter's Prime for only 3 weeks, but even he could see what was happening. "They keep giving you everyone else's problems," he whispered while helping clear a table. Naomi simply smiled. "Then I have more opportunities to help people." The young employee looked confused. He expected frustration. Instead, he found quiet confidence. Before he could respond, Daniel Harper appeared once again carrying a tablet displaying customer feedback. His expression tightened as he approached Naomi. "Table 24 says their appetizer is taking too long," he said. "Please explain why." Naomi glanced toward the kitchen, where she had already seen a delay caused by a new line cook still learning the evening menu. "The kitchen is running behind by about 7 minutes," she answered honestly. "I have already updated the guests and offered fresh bread while they wait." Daniel barely listened. "Guests do not care whose fault it is," he replied. "They remember the server." Without another word, he walked away. Several nearby employees exchanged satisfied looks. One quietly shook his head. "She always gets blamed." Another answered with a smirk. "Maybe she should find a different job." Naomi returned to her tables without defending herself. A few minutes later, she noticed an elderly woman struggling to read the menu because the restaurant lighting had become too dim near the corner booth. Naomi politely brought a small reading light from the hostess stand and placed it beside the menu without drawing attention to the woman's discomfort. The grateful customer reached across the table and gently squeezed Naomi's hand. "Young lady," she said with a warm smile, "you have made my evening easier than you know." Naomi thanked her quietly before continuing across the dining room. The simple exchange went unnoticed by most of the staff, but several nearby guests smiled as they watched. Kindness had quietly succeeded where efficiency alone never could. Even so, the whispers behind the service station continued growing louder. "She acts like every customer is royalty," one employee joked. "She forgets she is only wearing an apron." Naomi heard every word. She lowered her eyes for only a moment before straightening another place, setting with the same careful attention she had shown all evening. She understood something none of the others did. A person's true character was rarely revealed when life was easy. It appeared most clearly when respect cost something to give. And somewhere beyond the bright lights of the restaurant, someone was already on the way whose arrival would soon reveal exactly who everyone inside Carter's Prime truly was. The pressure inside Carter's Prime continued rising as the evening reached its busiest hour, and every table seemed to demand attention at exactly the same moment. The sound of polished silverware, quiet conversations, and clinking crystal glasses blended into the steady rhythm of a restaurant that prided itself on flawless service. Yet beneath the elegant atmosphere, another story was unfolding. Naomi Brooks moved through the crowded dining room with the same quiet confidence she had carried since the beginning of her shift. Every guest received her full attention regardless of appearance, wealth, or attitude. She remembered a child's food allergy without checking the order twice, recommended a local jazz club to tourists celebrating their anniversary, and comforted an anxious father worried about his daughter's birthday dinner arriving on time. Small moments that most people overlooked quietly became unforgettable experiences because someone had chosen to care. Meanwhile, the employees gathered behind the service station continued watching her with growing irritation. The more customers thanked Naomi, the more uncomfortable a few of her coworkers became. "Look at her," one server whispered. "She acts like she is training the rest of us." Another rolled his eyes. "She probably thinks she deserves to be running this place." Daniel Harper overheard the comments, but said nothing. Instead, he handed Naomi another unexpected responsibility. A private dining room hosting several retired business leaders needed immediate assistance after another server called in sick. "Take care of them." Daniel said quickly before turning away. Naomi accepted the assignment without hesitation and entered the private room, carrying fresh coffee and warm bread. The guests immediately noticed her calm professionalism. One gentleman with silver hair looked up from his conversation the moment she greeted the table. His expression slowly changed from polite acknowledgement to genuine surprise. He studied her face for several seconds before standing from his chair with unexpected energy. "Excuse me," he said warmly. "Have we met before?" Naomi smiled politely. "It is possible, sir. I have worked in hospitality for several years." The gentleman laughed softly and shook his head. "No, I remember now. You volunteered at the community literacy program on the South Side 3 years ago. My granddaughter struggled with reading, and you spent every Saturday helping children without asking for anything in return." The entire table fell silent. Naomi's smile became modest. "Your granddaughter did all the hard work," she answered gently. "I only encouraged her to keep believing in herself." The gentleman's eyes brightened. "She earned a scholarship last spring," he said proudly. She still talks about the young woman who refused to let her give up. Several guests around the table smiled with sincere admiration. One woman quietly thanked Naomi for reminding her that kindness often leaves the deepest impression long after people forget names and titles. Naomi wished them an enjoyable evening before returning to the dining room without another word. Behind the service station, several employees had witnessed the exchange from a distance. Confusion briefly replaced their usual confidence. "Who was that?" one whispered. "Maybe she just got lucky," another answered quickly, refusing to believe there could be more to the story. Daniel glanced toward the private dining room, then back at Naomi with narrowed eyes. Something about the respect she inspired seemed impossible to explain through ordinary experience. Yet before anyone could ask another question, the front entrance quietly opened, and a black luxury sedan came to a smooth stop outside the restaurant. The valet immediately straightened his jacket. The hostess instinctively adjusted her posture. None of the employees realized that the next few minutes would permanently change the way they understood both the woman in the black apron and the meaning of leadership itself. The moment the front doors opened, the atmosphere inside Carter's Prime shifted almost imperceptibly. The valet hurried forward with practiced precision while the hostess straightened her jacket before offering a welcoming smile. A tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit stepped inside with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to announce his importance. Ethan Carter acknowledged the staff with a polite nod instead of expecting attention, then slowly looked across the dining room before taking another step. Although he had spent the past 4 days visiting investors in New York, he had decided to return without notifying anyone at the restaurant. He wanted to see an ordinary evening exactly as it unfolded when no one expected the owner to appear. Daniel Harper noticed him first. His expression immediately brightened as he crossed the dining room with an enthusiastic smile. "Good evening, Mr. Carter. We were not expecting you tonight." Ethan shook his hand politely. "That is exactly why I came." His calm answer sounded friendly, yet Daniel sensed there was a reason behind the unexpected visit. Around the restaurant, employees quietly became more alert. Uniforms were adjusted. Conversations became more professional. Smiles appeared where frustration had existed only moments before. Ethan did not rush toward the office or request sales reports. Instead, he slowly walked through the dining room greeting guests who recognized him, thanking employees working in the kitchen, and observing every interaction without interrupting anyone. Years of building successful businesses had taught him that numbers explain performance, but people revealed culture. As he passed one section of the restaurant, he noticed Naomi helping an elderly couple celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. She had arranged a small dessert plate decorated with the words "Happy Anniversary" in elegant chocolate lettering, even though the request had never appeared in the reservation notes. The couple smiled like newlyweds as nearby guests quietly applauded the thoughtful surprise. Ethan paused for a brief moment, watching Naomi thank the pastry chef before returning to another table carrying fresh coffee. He did not call her name. He simply continued walking. Behind the service station, several employees exchanged uneasy glances. "Why is he walking around instead of going upstairs?" one whispered. Another shrugged nervously. "Maybe he is checking service." Daniel attempted to guide Ethan toward the office. "We have excellent numbers this quarter," he said confidently. "Guest satisfaction has also remained strong." Ethan smiled politely, but continued scanning the restaurant. I would rather hear what tonight has to say. Daniel hesitated. That answer was impossible to prepare for. A few minutes later, Ethan stopped near the kitchen entrance where he quietly watched servers collecting meals. Without realizing he was nearby, two employees resumed their earlier conversation. Naomi can handle another difficult table, one said with a laugh. She already has the impossible guests. The other grinned. That is what she is here for. Ethan said nothing. His expression remained calm, but his eyes shifted toward Naomi as she accepted another assignment without complaint. She thanked the employee who handed her the table even though it clearly increased her workload once again. There was no frustration in her voice, no attempt to defend herself, only quiet professionalism. Ethan remained silent for several more moments before looking toward the security camera mounted above the dining room entrance. His thoughtful expression suggested he had already begun asking questions that nobody else realized mattered. Long before anyone would hear a single surprising sentence, the truth had already started revealing itself through countless ordinary moments that everyone else had been too distracted to notice. The elegant rhythm of the restaurant continued on the surface, but Ethan Carter had already stopped paying attention to the polished silverware, the expensive decor, or the impressive sales numbers Daniel Harper proudly described. His attention remained fixed on something far more valuable. He had spent years building companies, and experience had taught him that culture was never measured by quarterly reports. It was measured by the moments people believed no one important was watching. While guests enjoyed carefully prepared meals beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, Ethan quietly stepped toward the office beside the kitchen. Daniel, he said calmly, I would like to review the security recordings from the last 2 hours. The manager looked surprised, but quickly forced a confident smile. Of course. Is there a problem? Ethan answered with complete composure. That is what I intend to find out. Minutes later, both men stood inside the small office as multiple security screens displayed different angles of the dining room, the service station, and the kitchen entrance. Ethan remained silent while the footage played. The first few minutes appeared ordinary. Servers carried trays. Guests arrived. Orders moved in and out of the kitchen. Then subtle details began revealing themselves. Ethan watched one employee quietly move a difficult table assignment from his own section into Naomi's without asking permission. Moments later, another server redirected an unhappy family toward her station while pretending it was part of the seating plan. On another screen, Ethan saw Naomi immediately helping the guests without questioning the decision or embarrassing her coworker. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It looks like they were simply trying to balance the workload, he offered carefully. Ethan continued watching without responding. More footage followed. A delayed order caused by the kitchen somehow became Naomi's responsibility during a conversation with Daniel. Another clip showed co-workers laughing after assigning her yet another complicated table. Ethan noticed something else that no report could ever explain. Naomi never blamed another employee. She never argued with management. She never allowed a guest to see frustration on her face. Instead, she solved every problem before moving quietly to the next table. The recording from the private dining room appeared next. Ethan watched the elderly gentleman stand from his chair after recognizing Naomi from the literacy program, where she had volunteered years earlier. He observed the sincere respect shown by every guest at the table and the modest way Naomi redirected all praise toward the young student she had once encouraged. Ethan paused the recording. Did anyone tell you about this conversation? He asked. Daniel slowly shook his head. No, sir. Ethan nodded thoughtfully before continuing the video. By the time the recording reached the present moment, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. Naomi had consistently received the most demanding assignments, accepted blame for mistakes she had not made, and continued serving every guest with remarkable grace. Despite receiving very little support from her own team, Ethan finally stood and looked toward the large window overlooking the dining room below. Through the glass, he could see Naomi helping an elderly customer put on her coat before returning to another table, carrying fresh coffee, with the same gentle smile she had worn all evening. Daniel waited nervously for instructions, expecting immediate discipline or angry criticism. Instead, Ethan spoke in the calm voice that had earned respect from thousands of employees across the country. Do not say anything yet, he said quietly. People reveal their true character when they believe the story, is already over." Then he turned away from the monitors and walked back toward the dining room, knowing that the most important conversation of the evening had not happened yet, but it was now only moments away. The dinner service continued without interruption, yet an invisible tension had settled over Carter's prime. Most guests remained unaware that anything unusual was happening, enjoying conversations over perfectly prepared meals while soft piano music drifted through the elegant dining room. Naomi Brooks had just delivered dessert to a family celebrating a college graduation when Daniel Harper approached her once again. His voice was low but firm enough for nearby employees to hear. "Naomi, I need you to cover table 31. Their server is overwhelmed." Before she could answer, another employee quietly added 2 more tables to her section. A few co-workers exchanged knowing smiles, certain she would once again carry responsibilities that belonged to someone else. Naomi simply nodded. Of course. She thanked Daniel, picked up another tray, and walked toward the waiting guests with the same calm professionalism that had defined her entire evening. As she reached the table, one impatient customer apologized for speaking sharply earlier. "You have been nothing but kind," he admitted. "Thank you for treating us with respect, even when we were frustrated." Naomi smiled warmly. "Everyone has difficult days. I hope the rest of your evening is much better." The family smiled back, their earlier frustration completely gone. Several nearby diners quietly noticed the exchange, but behind the service station, the whispers continued. "She thinks being everyone's hero will get her noticed," one employee muttered. Another laughed softly. "She is still just a waitress." At that exact moment, Ethan Carter walked calmly across the dining room. His expression remained composed as he stopped beside Naomi, just as she finished clearing the table. The surrounding employees immediately became silent. Daniel stepped forward, assuming Ethan wanted an update about restaurant operations. Instead, Ethan looked directly at Naomi with genuine warmth. "Have you finished helping your guests?" he asked. Naomi smiled gently. "Almost. I have one more table to check before they leave." Ethan nodded with quiet admiration. "They were fortunate to have you taking care of them tonight." The unexpected comment confused everyone standing nearby. A few employees exchanged puzzled looks. Daniel forced a polite smile. "She has certainly been busy this evening." Ethan slowly turned toward him. "Yes," he answered calmly. "Busier than anyone else." The words were not spoken with anger. They carried something far more unsettling. Quiet certainty. He then looked around the service station where several employees had gathered, each waiting for someone else to speak first. The silence became almost uncomfortable. Finally, one server laughed nervously. "She works hard. She can handle it." Ethan held his gaze for a moment before asking one simple question. "Did any of you ask whether she should have to?" Nobody answered. Even the sound of silverware seemed distant for a brief moment. Ethan stepped closer to Naomi and gently took the serving tray from her hands before placing it on a nearby counter. Then he turned toward the entire group. His voice remained calm enough that nearby guests continued eating. Yet every employee could hear each word with perfect clarity. "There is something all of you deserve to know." Every face in the room focused on him. Daniel's confident expression slowly disappeared. Naomi remained completely composed, neither surprised nor uncomfortable. Ethan looked at her with unmistakable respect before speaking the sentence that instantly changed the meaning of every whisper, every assumption, and every careless judgment made that evening. "Naomi is not only one of the finest people I have ever known," he said quietly. "She is my wife." The dining room fell into complete silence. No raised voice could have carried more power than those 5 simple words, because in a single moment, every person who had measured Naomi by the black apron she wore was forced to confront the true measure of their own character. For several long seconds, no one moved. The gentle piano melody continued drifting through the dining room as if nothing had happened, yet for every employee standing near the service station, the entire evening had suddenly been divided into 2 moments. Everything before those words and everything after them. The confident smiles disappeared. The whispered jokes no longer seemed harmless. Daniel Harper looked from Ethan Carter to Naomi Brooks, struggling to process what he had just heard. Several servers lowered their eyes, replaying every careless comment they had made throughout the night. Naomi remained exactly as she had been before the revelation. She did not look proud. She did not appear offended. She simply stood with quiet dignity. the same woman who had patiently served every guest without expecting recognition. Ethan allowed the silence to linger before speaking again. If any of you believe tonight is about hiding a marriage, then you have misunderstood why Naomi has been here. His voice remained calm, steady, and free of anger. She asked me months ago whether the values we proudly print in our employee handbook truly exist inside our restaurants. I told her I believed they did. She suggested we find out instead of assuming. The employees listened without interrupting. No one received special treatment tonight. Ethan continued. In fact, Naomi insisted that no one know who she was. She wanted to experience this workplace exactly as every new employee experiences it. She wanted honesty, not privilege. Daniel swallowed hard. Sir, I had no idea. Ethan nodded. That is correct. You were not supposed to know. He slowly looked around the room, making eye contact with each employee. What concerns me is not that people failed to recognize my wife. What concerns me is how quickly some people decided another human being deserved less respect simply because they believed she had less authority. The words landed far more heavily than any raised voice ever could. One of the servers who had repeatedly mocked Naomi stepped forward with visible embarrassment. I thought we were just joking, he admitted quietly. Ethan answered without hostility. The easiest jokes are often the hardest ones to carry if you are the person hearing them every day. No one argued with him. Across the dining room, several guests had begun noticing the unusual silence among the staff. But service continued without disruption because Naomi quietly excused herself and checked on a nearby table whose coffee cups needed refilling. Even after everything had been revealed, she continued doing exactly what she had been doing all evening. An elderly customer watched her walk away before smiling at Ethan. She has more grace than most people with far greater titles, he said warmly. Ethan smiled with unmistakable pride. That is one of the reasons I married her. Naomi returned a few moments later carrying fresh coffee for another guest who thanked her sincerely. Ethan waited until she finished before speaking again. Leadership is not about reminding people who owns the building, he said. It is about discovering whether every person inside the building feels seen, respected, and valued. The room remained completely still. For the first time that evening, the employees were no longer looking at Naomi's apron. They were looking at the example she had quietly set from the moment her shift had begun. They finally understood that the greatest difference between her and everyone else had never been her relationship with the owner. It had been her unwavering decision to treat every person with dignity, even when that same dignity had not always been returned. The final guests gradually finished their meals as the evening settled into a quieter rhythm, but inside Carter's Prime, no employee would remember the night's revenue, the reservations, or the glowing customer reviews. They would remember the lesson they had just witnessed. Ethan Carter looked around the dining room before speaking once more, his voice steady enough to carry authority without raising its volume. Tonight is not about punishment, he said. It is about responsibility. A healthy culture cannot exist unless every person is willing to examine their own behavior. No one interrupted. The employees who had spent the evening whispering behind Naomi's back now stood in thoughtful silence, each replaying choices that had seemed insignificant only an hour earlier. Daniel Harper finally stepped forward. His usual confidence had been replaced by sincere humility. He looked directly at Naomi before speaking. I owe you an apology. I should have asked questions before assigning blame. I should have noticed what was happening instead of assuming everything was fine. Naomi met his eyes with the same calm expression she had shown every guest that evening. Thank you for saying that, she replied gently. Leadership begins when someone is willing to learn instead of defend every mistake. Her answer surprised several employees. There was no desire to embarrass anyone. There was no satisfaction in watching others feel uncomfortable. She offered exactly what she had offered every customer all evening: grace. One by one, other employees quietly admitted their own mistakes. The server who had repeatedly shifted difficult tables into Naomi's section apologized without excuses. Another admitted that joining careless jokes had felt easier than standing up for a coworker. Even the young busser who had quietly worried about Naomi earlier confessed that he wished he had spoken sooner. Ethan listened to every apology without interruption before finally nodding. Owning a mistake is the first step, he said. Changing habits is the second. That is the step that truly matters. He then turned toward Naomi. Would you tell everyone what you learned during these past months? Every employee focused on her. Naomi took a slow breath before answering. Most people were kind, she began softly. Some were incredibly generous. Others were simply busy. But I also learned that respect often depends on what people think you can do for them. The moment someone believes another person has less influence, less education, or less importance, it becomes easy to forget that every individual deserves the same dignity. Her words filled the room with thoughtful silence. A uniform should never determine someone's value, she continued. Neither should a title, a paycheck, or the color of someone's skin. Every guest who walks through these doors deserves kindness. Every employee standing in this room deserves that same kindness from one another. Several workers quietly nodded. They understood that her message reached far beyond one difficult evening. Ethan smiled with unmistakable pride before making one final announcement. Beginning the following week, every manager throughout the Carter Hospitality Group would participate in a new leadership program focused not only on customer service, but also on empathy, accountability, and mutual respect. Naomi would help design the program using everything she had observed while working anonymously inside the restaurants. No one questioned the decision. After everything they had witnessed, it felt entirely deserved. As the lights dimmed and the last guests thanked the staff before leaving, Carter's Prime looked exactly as it had at the beginning of the evening. The marble floors still reflected the chandeliers. The tables remained elegantly arranged. Yet something far more important had changed. For the first time, many people inside those walls understood that the strongest foundation of any successful business was never luxury, reputation, or profit. It was the simple decision to treat every human being with equal respect before knowing anything else about them. 6 months later, Carter's Prime looked as elegant as ever, but the greatest transformation could not be found beneath the crystal chandeliers or reflected across the polished marble floors. It lived in the way people greeted one another before a shift began, in the willingness of experienced employees to help new team members without being asked, and in the quiet understanding that respect was no longer reserved for titles or positions. Every newly hired employee now spent the first morning of orientation listening to a simple message displayed on the large screen inside the training room. Respect before assumption. Listen before judgment. Serve with dignity. Those words had become more than a slogan. They had become the standard by which every decision was measured throughout the Carter Hospitality Group. Naomi Brooks stood at the front of the room wearing a professional navy blazer instead of the black apron she had once quietly tied around her waist before every shift. She smiled as she welcomed another class of managers and restaurant leaders from across the country. Rather than beginning with company policies or financial goals, she shared stories about ordinary moments that revealed extraordinary character. She reminded them that guests often forgot the details of a meal, but remembered forever how someone made them feel. She also reminded them that employees deserve the same respect that restaurants promised every customer. Around the room, managers listened carefully, taking notes not because they had been instructed to do so, but because they had seen how one evening had changed an entire organization. Ethan Carter often attended those sessions, never introducing himself first as the founder or owner. Instead, he sat beside new employees, listened to their questions, and thanked them for choosing to become part of the company. His leadership style had become noticeably quieter. He no longer measured success only through expansion plans or revenue reports. He measured it by how safely people felt sharing ideas, admitting mistakes, and encouraging one another to improve. Daniel Harper remained the general manager of Carter's Prime, but his approach had changed completely. Every week, he met privately with employees, asking a simple question before discussing schedules or performance. Is there anything preventing you from doing your best work? Those conversations uncovered concerns that had once remained hidden, and small problems were solved before they became larger ones. The young busser who had quietly admired Naomi's kindness during that unforgettable evening had since become a server. Whenever new employees struggled, he remembered how easy it had been to remain silent and chose instead to offer help before anyone needed to ask. The restaurant itself continued earning outstanding reviews, but guests often praised something that could never appear on a menu. They described the warmth of the staff, the sincerity of the service, and the feeling that every person inside the building genuinely cared about one another. Those comments became the company's proudest achievement. One quiet evening after another successful dinner service, Ethan and Naomi stood near the front entrance watching the final guests leave with grateful smiles. The dining room looked peaceful beneath the soft lights, almost identical to the night that had changed everything. Ethan glanced at Naomi and smiled. "You were right," he said gently. "Culture is never built in boardrooms. It is built in ordinary moments." Naomi returned the smile that had comforted strangers and challenged assumptions without ever raising her voice. "Every person gives us an opportunity," she replied softly. "We simply decide whether we will honor their dignity or overlook it." As they turned off the lights together and prepared to leave, the restaurant stood as living proof that true leadership was never about reminding people who held power. It was about creating a place where no one needed power to be treated with kindness. Because the greatest lesson that began with a black apron ended by teaching an entire company that respect is the one form of wealth every human being can afford to give.